My name is Crystal Kendall, and I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations here at Johnson & Wales University and a proud alum. Thank you for joining us for Cook Along with JWU Thanksgiving. We're excited to bring you this program and enjoy the process of making a chef favorite to bring to your Thanksgiving table this season. Before we get started, I would like to review a few housekeeping items. Please keep your cameras on, but your mics muted. Please feel free to turn on your mic and ask a question at any time. We do ask that you use the hand raise feature and I will call on you. If you would prefer, you can absolutely ask your question into the chat and I will read it out loud. The chat feature can also be used to message other attendees tonight. I would now like to introduce tonight's presenter. Kelly Fernandez, class of 2011, is a culinary instructor in the College of Food Innovation and Technology here at Johnson & Wales University. She's worked in kitchens in and around Boston, including Bergamot, Minton, the Four Seasons, and Sycamore. In addition to teaching, Kelly is pursuing a master's degree in gastronomy with a concentration in nutrition at Boston University's Metropolitan College. This recipe is simple yet tasty, and the recipe that made Chef Kelly fall in love with Brussels sprouts when she was a line cook, and she's very excited to share it with you. Please join me in welcoming Chef Kelly Fernandez, and I will turn it over to her to get us started tonight.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Thank you, everyone that has joined us tonight for this cook along. I think it's going to be a really fun, easy recipe for Thanksgiving. Like Crystal said, I am a new instructor here at Johnson & Wales. I've been teaching about 2.5 years now. I'm very blessed and happy to be here. Moving into what we are doing, Brussels sprouts. Hated it for a really long time, and when I worked at a restaurant in Newton, I was lucky enough to fall in love with it. It's a phenomenal, versatile vegetable that yields a really awesome flavor when it's roasted and either in a pan or in the oven. So this evening's recipe, like I said, very simple. I kept it simple because I know Thanksgiving oven is working overtime. You're working overtime, trying to put together a delicious meal for friends and family. And this one is really a straightforward, easy, start it in a hot pan and pop it in the oven for about 15-20 minutes. So it doesn't take a lot of oven space, doesn't take a lot of stove space. It can be done last minute, one of the very first, last things that we put together. And it's super delicious. Simple ingredients, a little bit of neutral oil, some Brussels sprouts, some Spanish chorizo. In this case, I'm using Spanish spicy chorizo just for a little bit of kick. I've kept the oil that I rendered the chorizo in, so I have a little bit of crispy bits. And we'll toss that with the Brussels sprouts as well. And then lastly, we'll just add some either shaved or cubed manchego cheese, just to give it a little bit of nuttiness, a little bit of saltiness, a little bit of creaminess to it. So I start with cast iron pan. If you don't have a cast iron pan, I need nice saute pan that is oven safe, something that does not have a rubber hand on it. That you're willing to put into the oven. I'm going to get it nice and hot. I'm going to put a little bit of some neutral oil in. And in the meantime, while that's heating up, I'm going to set up another saute pan, a little bit of oil, and I'm going to add my chorizo into. Which my chorizo, I just crumbled up. Very nice, very clean. You can crumble it in a robo or a food processor if you have one. If you don't have it, I usually just crumble it by hand. Big chunks are fine. It's really a rustic dish, so it's really up to you what you want to do. So I just got a little bit of my chorizo crumble in the pan. I start with a cold pan in the oil. Then I adjust my heat as needed. And what I am doing is just rendering the fat out of it and turning it nice and crispy. And then I'm going to save that oil. As my pan is heating up, I'm going to put my Brussels sprouts cut side down. So I get a really nice char on the Brussels sprouts. By getting a nice char, you really develop a nice flavor with these Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are mini little cabbage. They don't have a ton of flavor to them. So you can add that nutty roasted flavor to it just by roasting them off. I want to roast it undisturbed or sear it undisturbed on the pan until they start to get nice and golden brown. Once they're golden brown, I will agitate the pan. I'll add a little bit of salt and pepper, and I'll pop it in the oven. That's a example of a neutral oil, canola oil, vegetable oil works really well. They tend to have a high smoking point, so you can really get that pan nice and hot without turning the oil bitter. I would avoid using olive oil because it does have a lower smoking point and has a very delicate flavor. I like to use olive oil more for finishing a dish versus cooking with the dish. And because we're trying to get a very hard sear on this, I'm going to avoid using olive oil. But a nice neutral oil works perfectly in this. Goes fast. You get a nice brown faster than you think, so you don't want to walk away from it. Add a little bit of oil as you see fit. As I'm flipping here, starting to get some really nice brown color. That was perfect right there. Lower my flame. I'm pretty good. I'm getting some really nice char here. Darker, a little darker is always better. At this point, I'm going to hit it with a little bit of salt and a tiny bit of pepper. More oil going into the oven. Off, so everything is evenly combined. Then I'm going to pop it in the oven. I have my oven set to 425 degrees. I want to cook these as quickly as possible. Still keep that char, but not steam the Brussels sprouts. Not looking to steam it. I want just al dente texture, and I still want to get a little bit of roast on the other side of the Brussels sprout. And the beauty of this recipe is you can set everything up pretty far in advance. The chorizo can be rendered off earlier in the day. In the morning, the day before, you can just store it in a dry container with a little bit of paper to absorb any liquid. And what we're looking for is this texture here. Right, so it's crumbly, it's dark brown, it has a really nice flavor. And then I've reserved the oil, the chorizo oil. You don't need to reserve a lot, a couple of tablespoons. This is just going to get added towards the end for a little bit of flavor. All that is cooking. I'd like to show you how to prepare Brussels sprouts if you've never prepared Brussels sprouts. Tiny little cabbages. What I like to do is just take the root off, set that aside, split my Brussels sprout in half, and then I like to just peel the first couple of layers of green off. Usually tend to be a little bit tough and bitter. Okay. This can be done ahead of time. Set this up earlier in the day. and have your chorizo cooked off earlier in the day. And then all you're doing is just searing and putting it in the oven. A great little recipe. Of course, you can have a glass of wine while you're cooking. Recommend a dry white with this dish. You can adjust the quantity however much you need, as long as you have a big enough pan for it. Yes.
Or just as in,
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I heard.
they be parboiled?
No, I do not recommend parboiling them. Just because you run the risk of overcooking them, and they're such a small produce. They're so small that you run the risk of overcooking it. So it cooks pretty quickly in a high oven, 425 degrees. You'll have it done in about 15 to 20 minutes. Especially if you have a convection oven at home, an oven that has a fan, it'll go pretty fast. But I do recommend starting from raw. If manchego is not a cheese that you prefer, you can add really whatever cheese you like to it. You can add a blue cheese if you want to go something funky, a cheddar cheese if you want something that's going to melt really nicely, creamy. It's very versatile dish. And if Brussels sprouts not your thing, I like delicata squash. You keep the skin on it, you roast it just like you would with the Brussels sprouts, really hot cast iron pan, pop it in the oven and roast it until it's just about fork tender. And you can add your chorizo to it. Cheese. We have another 10 minutes or so in the oven. So I have a chorizo bits here, and with the chorizo, all you want to do, just a really small strainer, a tea strainer works perfectly. You just want to push out as much of the oil as you can. It's not going to yield a ton, especially if you're using a Spain style chorizo, which is going to be dry and crumbly and a lot of paprika. But that's okay. Like I said, this is just going to be a finishing boil, just a little bit of a touch. You end up rendering a little bit of oil instead of throwing it out, incorporate it back into the dish, just so you don't have waste. It just, especially if you're making this with spicy chorizo, it just adds that nice little heat to it without having to add anything else to it. So it's a very versatile, very easy dish, minimal effort, minimal ingredients. So it's cost effective and it's time effective as well. We have busy days now that everyone's going back into the office and holiday parties are happening more and more. What kind of over the colder hump, hopefully. Time is of the essence with the holiday season. So we want this to be as easy as possible on ourselves or anyone that we're bringing this to. And it holds pretty nicely in a warm oven, or just cover your bowl with aluminum foil. It's pretty nice.
Chef, are you going to be adding any spices to the Brussels sprouts, or is all the spice going to be coming from the chorizo and the manchego?
So the spices in terms of heat is coming from my spicy chorizo. The flavor is coming from both the chorizo and the manchego. If you want to add more flavor to it, you absolutely can. I sometimes like to hit it with a little bit of sherry vinegar or balsamic vinegar just for a little bit of acid. If you want it to be very spice driven, like in terms of heat, you can absolutely add jalapeno to it or chilies to it, dried chilies, fresh chilies. You can add cayenne pepper to it. It's really your preference. I think the spicy chorizo gives it just enough heat where it's not boring, but you also get to taste the natural flavor of the roasted Brussels sprouts. Chorizo act as an accent, and the manchego as well work as an accent flavor on it.
Thank you, Chef.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. It was a wonderful question. So they do start to take on some color opposite side. So I have my handy dandy cake tester. I use this for everything. In terms of checking, if something is done, I'm looking for it to go through and it should fall off relatively. So I'm having some hesitation, which tells me that I need a little bit more time in the oven. Just to show you how beautiful that color has gotten, even on the sides that didn't receive contact on the flame. It's nice color, nice texture. It smells really nicely, especially if you use freshly cracked pepper. Happy to answer any other questions you may have. Oh, a fun fact about Brussels sprouts, I did a little bit of research. They contain a vitamin that's very good for your eyes. So you want to keep your vision going healthy. Brussels sprouts is a good option for that. And
So one question, Chef, sorry. Yes. How do you know, well roasted versus burnt? Where do you find the line between those? Because I know that can be kind of hard of a line to navigate.
Yes, that can be a difficult line to navigate. So I'm of the group where you push it as far as you can. It has a better taste. I like bitter taste. You can definitely tell if it's burned just by smell. But if you get a really, really nice roasted dark color, like what I just showed you just a few moments ago, maybe just a little bit longer. With a Brussels sprout, you're not really going to taste burned. You're going to just taste like a very roasted color. So it depends on what it is you're roasting. Brussels sprouts don't have a lot of sugar in them, so there's not going to be a lot of caramelization. This is more Maillard browning than caramelization. Something like carrots that have natural sugars in them can burn pretty quickly, and it's difficult to be able to visually see if something is burned or just very deeply roasted. So at that point, you just have to go by taste. And if it is burned, hopefully you haven't burned a big batch, you could maybe make another one, but it's also a preference thing. I don't mind lightly burned carrots or deeply roasted carrots or deeply roasted Brussels sprouts. I appreciate that, the flavor of it. I'm not very much a sweet lover. I like things more on the bitter roasted side. I hope that answered your question.
Great, thank you, Chef.
Of course. show you again. Sticking, but I'm having just a little bit of hesitation. So I'm just gonna let it go a little bit more. As you can see, like I have some dark spots here, but I still have some really nice roasted. As it roasts, you'll lose some of the layers or some of the leaves, and then you'll just continue to get a little bit more roasting on the inner layers. So I think these are very nice. I chose to do Brussels sprouts also because they're very easy and versatile, but I find that a lot of folks tend to steer clear of Brussels sprouts. I don't know if it's because of the look of it, how small they are, they don't know how to cook them, or if they just think it's a mini cabbage, it may not taste great. Cabbage tends to have a not so great tasting flavor. It's very bland. So I wanted to do that because just from the power of cooking, of roasting, develop such a unique flavor with it. And if you don't have a cast iron pan, or if you don't have an oven that is oven friendly, feel free to use a saute pan. Get it nice and roasted on the pan, and then you can transfer it to a sheet pan, a half sheet pan, or a quarter sheet pan, or even a baking dish. As long as it's metal, so it can really retain its heat, you can pop it in the oven. So you don't necessarily have to have a cast iron pan. So it's like I said, it's very versatile. Roast off some more.
Another question, Chef, is can you substitute the chorizo with linguiça?
Yes, you may. Absolutely, you may. Yep. Really, any sausage you want. If you don't eat pork, you can absolutely do a chicken sausage, a chicken-based sausage. I would tailor the flavor of the Brussels sprouts to the taste of the chicken sausage. If it has a lot of woodsy herbs in it, oregano or thyme, you could always add oregano and thyme to the Brussels sprouts just to kind of continue that flavor trend. Linguiça is great. The Portuguese chorizo, the Shaved or the linguiça that is a little different from Spanish style, works perfectly as well. Colombian style chorizo works as well. It's a little bit more fresh, but you can still crumble it up. You can still roast it or sear it off, render it. You may not get as much of the oil, but that's okay because there's so much flavor in that sausage that you can still just hit it with a little bit of olive oil and toss in the sausage, and you're still going to get a really good flavor.
Great, thank you. And then a question to piggyback off of that question is, would you change the cheese if you then decided to change the meat choice or sausage choice as well?
Yes, I would. Let's see, if we're going chicken, I would probably go mild cheddar, maybe a soft cheese, like a soft rind cheese that's been aged for a little bit. And just kind of like do like little bits of it on mixed in. And that will get really nice and creamy. If you wanted to do bacon, absolutely you could render off some bacon, add some cheese to that if you wanted to. That works really nicely. I love blue cheese and bacon and Brussels sprouts. They go really nice together. A very mild blue cheese, like a Bailey Hazen blue, that still has a little bit of that funkiness, but is not sharp. It's very nice and creamy and mild. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Chef.
Of course. I'll have a few that are sticking. It's just gonna get- Something else that I just wanted to show you. That you can add herbs. I have some fresh parsley. Not necessary, but just adds a little bit of If you have some herbs sitting in the refrigerator that need to be used up, feel free to use it. Basil would work really nicely in this, although it's a very delicate herb. So I would add that at the very last minute, right before you're ready to serve, so it still has a little bit of integrity in it. But this is just some flat leaf parsley that I just finely chiffonade. Just running my knife through it. I prepared that a little bit earlier in the evening, so that is another component that if you wanted to add, it's not necessary. You can set that up as well. So here I have some of my manchego. I kept it whole and I'm going to peel it. But if you wanted to cube it, show you.
Now, Chef, would you be able to explain what a chiffonade is, as far as
Absolutely.
how to cut that at home, or the safest and best way to execute that cut?
Definitely. So a chiffonade is a very, very fine ribbon cut. I can demo on some of the Brussels sprout leaves are perfectly. This is one of the classic cuts that we show our students here at Johnson & Wales in the culinary program. It's done nicely. It really elevates your dish visually. Really much effort in it. So you can really chiffonade anything. You can chiffonade greens. You can chiffonade the Brussels sprout leaves. Obviously, herbs work really nicely. So I just have my Brussels sprout leaves stacked up. Okay. And all I'm going to do is stack. I'm going to make sure that my fingers are away from the blade. So I hold it kind of in a claw motion. Make my initial cut, I'm just going to set that aside. Then very, very finely, I'm going to do a sawing motion. Slice. You can do it very thin if you want, or you can do it very thick. The choice is yours. Obviously, if it's a little bit thicker, you'll have an opportunity to taste the parsley a little bit more for any herb that you're doing. I wanted to do a little bit of ribbon. Yeah. Show you. So you can do a thicker ribbon shift like I have towards the bottom of my hand, or you can do a little bit more finer ribbon shift or chiffonade. But the choice is yours. Here, let's see, I have. And again, it's not needed in this recipe. If you have it, want to utilize it, absolutely. I am pretty big on making sure that we're not wasting food, especially in this day and age. So if you have it, great. If you don't worry about it. Don't run out and grab it, especially herbs at the store. I mean, a 4-ounce packet at the store costs you a lot of money, and you use a tiny bit of it, and then you're stuck with it, and it just sits in the back of the refrigerator and dries out. So that's not necessary.
Thank you so much, Chef, for showing that. So I do have
Of
one more
course.
question. Any
Yes.
tips on cooking Brussels sprouts on a backyard grill? As far as charcoal flavor, what type of oil they should use, and kind of how to handle that indirect/direct heat.
Absolutely. Treat it like you would an oven. Start with a very hot pan. Get your pan as hot as possible over direct heat. If you have charcoal, if you have wood, depends on what you have. Obviously, wood is going to give it a better flavor, a smoky flavor. Treat it just like I did. Cut side down, a neutral oil, canola oil, or vegetable oil, or corn oil. That has a higher smoking point. And by smoking point, I mean the highest you can get that oil's temperature without it beginning to burn. Eventually, if it gets too hot and starts to burn, you start to lose, it starts to turn bitter. The flavor starts to get very bitter of the oil, and it will incorporate in your food. And it's a very distinct flavor that you can't quite put your finger on, but you just know it just doesn't taste right. And as it's roasting, you can close the lid on the grill. I would move it to a little bit more of an indirect heat and just cook it like I would the oven. But I think if you have a grill, absolutely, if you have some wood chips that you can smoke, give that really nice smoky flavor. I would recommend maybe using smoked pork belly or bacon, just to kind of go with the theme of the smoked flavor. But that sounds divine. If you're making some, let me know. I will join you.
Thank you, Chef.
Sprouts are good. Right. So going back to a question where there was a question about how do you know if it's burned or not? So I'm going to show you a good example here. So I have some leaves that fell apart, very individual. That is burnt. I wouldn't eat that. That's going to be very bitter. But this Brussels sprout here has a nice little char to it. And I were to cut into him, it's nice and soft, but he's still pretty yellowish green in the middle. So that to me is a very nice roasted flavor. Okay, so and if you have any leaves that come loose beginning of the cooking process and they burn, you can easily just remove them from the pan and discard of them. Brussels sprouts off to the side. And I'm going to show you if you wanted to do the manchego. If it falls apart, that's totally fine. I would err on a little bit of a smaller cut. Just so it's not going to melt, but we do want the cheese to get just a little bit heated, a little bit of warmth to it. And because there's still going to be a bite chew to it, you don't want to bite down on a big chunk of cheese. We want it to be a small little bite. Like I said, this is accenting sprouts. So you can do that if you want to. I'm going to shave it with my peeler, which I like to do. I like the effect that it does. Just a standard peeler. And just get these really nice strips here. And that's what I'm going to use. I'll break them up a little bit. Like kind of through it. So now to finish the chorizo. So, I'm sorry, to finish the Brussels sprouts, I add a little bit of my chorizo and a little bit of my chorizo oil.
Now, Chef, do you have the flame on that currently, or is that just going to be?
I do not. I turned the flame off.
Okay.
I don't want to cook this anymore. Add a little bit of salt to it. Potato to sauce. Parsley. Serve it in. Like. Stop it. Cheese, and I am of team that loves cheese, so the more the merrier on cheese. Right. Yeah, so let's just hit it with a little bit of fresh cracked black pepper. There it is. Very simple, easy dish. For Thanksgiving, really for any cool fall night that you're feeling some Brussels sprouts. Very easy. We did it in about 40 minutes. And of course, your oven, depending on how strong your oven is and what type of oven you have and how hot you have it, 40 to 45 minutes from start to finish. If you get stuff done in advance, maybe a half hour, 20 minutes, depending on how hot that oven is. That's it. Very nice, simple.
Great, thank you, Chef. So we're just going to open this up for any extra questions that anybody has. I will say I do have one. So what main dish, if we're not doing this for Thanksgiving with, a traditional turkey, would you suggest that this would go best with?
Ooh, maybe a creamy polenta. Nice. Or risotto. When I'm thinking Brussels sprouts, really any type of Brussels sprouts, however it's prepared, I'm always thinking a very homey dish. Creamy polenta, risotto, maybe a stewed meat. If you've removed the chorizo, if you wanted to remove the chorizo, a stew, like a braised beef or stewed beef would be really nice. I've done it where I just had roasted Brussels sprouts in a very light vinaigrette, served with a beautifully grilled pork chop or a pan-seared pork chop, and a light salad on the side, and that works just as beautifully. What else? We always do chicken and Brussels sprouts. Chicken's great. It's another versatile protein, pan-seared, grilled, oven roasted, breast, spatchcocked if you wanted to do the whole chicken. Sweet potatoes go really nicely with Brussels sprouts. So if you did like a whipped sweet potato or a mashed sweet potato, it's go really nicely with Brussels sprouts as well. And chorizo and sweet potato are a nice little mix too as well.
Great, thank you, Chef. And then we did have one question in the chat that I will address out loud. So the recipe is listed right on the website. And we will be sending that out when we send out the recording as well. If anybody would like to, utilize it for their Thanksgiving table and multiply it, fairly easy to do. But of course, you can reach out to any of us, or I'm sure Chef Kelly would be happy to assist with some, yielding recipes for this one. And then another question that we have is, how would you feel, or do you think it would be weird to add dried cranberries or pomegranate seeds to top off this dish?
I think that's a grand idea, especially the pomegranate seeds. Give it a little bit of freshness, a little bit of brightness, without necessarily adding a new flavor to it. So I think that's a grand idea. If you want that little pop of sweetness, dried cranberries work great. If you wanted to get a little adventurous, you could do pickled fresh cranberries. It's cranberry season right now. And just a very standard pickling liquid, parts vinegar of your choice, a red wine or white wine vinegar, water, and sugar and salt to taste. Bring that up to a boil, pour it over your cranberries hot, and just let it sit until it gets room temperature. It starts to soften the cranberries a little bit, and you have a really nice pop of acidic brightness to it, and that would be really nice to add. And it would be a very visually beautiful addition to the dish. So a little bit of roasted green, a nice creamy white from the cheese, that bright green from the herbs if you're using, and then you have the pops of red in there. Just kind of adds a really nice visual aspect to it.
Great, thank you. And then another question that we have is, what wines would you, pair with this dish, or any suggestions as far as what you think would work best with this?
I would definitely go with a dry white wine. I think sweet would be a little too much for it, and red wine might overpower this dish or this side dish. So I would stick with a full-bodied dry white wine. You could do a little bit of a sparkle. A Gruner would be really nice with that. It's very effervescent, kind of like bubbles in the mouth and kind of works as a palate cleanser. I would avoid an oaky wine, maybe not a Chardonnay, unless it's a lightly oaked or an unoaked Chardonnay. That might be a better choice. Chardonnay. But definitely a white wine, and stick with a nice medium or full-bodied white wine that's dry.
Great, thank you, Chef.
Probably even pull off a sparkling white wine if it's not terribly sweet, like a Chocolina, which is from the Basque region of Spain. It's naturally effervescent, not sweet at all, but it's not dry. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. It's very just like very cleansing on the palate. I think that would be really nice with Brussels sprouts.
Great, thank you, Chef. I'm going to see if we have any other questions before we wrap up our program today. Feel free to drop them in the chat or hand raise or ask with your mic off or mic on.
Crystal, is it possible to share my email with them in case they have any questions?
Absolutely. I will drop that in the chat. Yeah, I'll drop it right in the chat for anybody. And again, that can go for yielding questions or any substitution questions as well. I know that you did touch on it slightly at the beginning with the delicata squash, but yes. Is there any other vegetable that you think with the dish you have it now, with the chorizo and the manchego, that you think would work well with that?
Try it with green beans. Obviously, we'd want to just saute the green beans. I wouldn't roast them in the oven because they go really fast. But I would get a really nice hard saute or sear on the green beans. Still add the chorizo. You could still add manchego to it. Delicata squash I love because it has a creamy interior once it's cooked, but you hold on to the skin and it just kind of adds a little bit of texture to it. Maybe a winter squash that's not terribly sweet, so I would avoid a honey nut squash. Butternut squash might be great. Long Island cheese pumpkin, which are very large, kind of squat squash. That would probably work really nicely. Acorn squash would be really great, especially because they're very meaty. They have a little bit of a drier texture than other squashes. I would definitely try and stick with squashes or with the green beans, especially if it's the season. Fall, we have a lot of winter squash coming in. That would be a great one.
Great, thank you, Chef. And I want to thank you for your time tonight and showing us this amazing recipe. I will say somebody just said they usually roast Brussels sprouts with pancetta, but the chorizo is definitely bringing it to a new level. So we want to thank you for your recipe, and we want to thank everybody in attendance tonight. I am going to pass it over to Liza Gentile to wrap us up for the program tonight.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to email me and I'll reach out, answer any questions that I answer.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. And thank you, Chef Kelly, for showing us how to make this delicious dish this evening. We're all so grateful for your time and hearing more about this recipe that made you fall in love with Brussels sprouts. We really appreciate all that you've taught us. To the alumni in attendance this evening, thank you all for being here. Your registration for this event included a gift to the College of Food Innovation and Technology, which will go to work immediately to help provide a truly unique and exceptional education that prepares our students for future success. This experience is made possible by the generous support of our loyal donors, and gifts of all sizes combined to have an impact on our students that is truly powerful. As an alumni donor, your gift also demonstrates your investment to our mission, which can inspire additional support from other members of the JWU community, as well as corporate donors and foundations. You can make an additional gift by clicking the link in the chat window. Thank you all so much for your support. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's program, Cook Along with JWU Thanksgiving, which is part of our JWU for You programming. I hope you'll join us again in the future. For the full listing of upcoming events, including alumni executives in the food space discuss innovation and evolution coming up this Wednesday, please visit alumni.jwu.edu. Have a great evening, and don't forget to tag us in your completed dishes at JWU Alumni on all platforms. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.